So we're going live, so everybody be on your best behavior. You don't want to get in trouble like that school board out in California. They shouldn't have been saying naughty words anyway. Well, Judge Smeltzer, how are you today? Besides being muted, I mean.
There we go. Now you got me now there, Jim.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Thank you.
It's noon and we do have a limited time.
I think I might be having some bandwidth issues. I don't know if anybody else is.
Who is?
Sorry about that.
I think we'll start the meeting and we can do some of the housekeeping things. People can join us as they can. This is the evidence-based decision-making work group of the CJCC of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors, Dunn County, Wisconsin, USA. To our thousands of loyal viewers, welcome. Excuse me, Sarah, I assume you will write down keep track of people's names as they show up for the roll. Oh, now what?
I'm having some bandwidth issues. I think you asked if I was keeping attendance, and
Right.
Yes, I am.
So you're having trouble hearing me as well?
Yeah.
This is not good.
Well, I think what's happening is Sarah might be the problem child today.
Just today?
Yeah. IT work on my computer. To adjust the bandwidth, it seems like there's too much.
Sarah, try muting yourself on the computer and just call in using the number.
While we're waiting for the technical difficulties to get straightened out, some of you I have seen on videos of previous meetings, but not had a chance to meet. So Aaron, I don't think you were at the last month's meeting, were you? Still muted. Well, the Zoom gods are not with us today.
Trying to do this through the phone and appear by video.
All right.
All right. You good?
Yeah, I can.
No, okay. No, I was not at the last EBDM work group. I appeared on one of the, I think, CJCC for you guys this last month. So I'm just into my second week of full Dunn County duties and relieved the other office that I was trying to cover while my position was being filled there. So I'm your new Department of Corrections, Corrections Field Supervisor rep for CJCC.
Great. Brad, how about you? Don't believe we've met either. Muted yet?
Is that working now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. I'm Brad Erickson. I'm doing the deferred stuff for the district attorney's office. was not at the last meeting. I had another conflicting meeting. I was a probation and parole agent for just about 30 years and then came over here.
Great, good to meet you as well.
Thank you.
Caitlin?
Hi, I'm Caitlin Engel. I'm with the Dunn County Health Department, and this is one of my first few meetings, just sort of trying to dip my toes into the water while juggling COVID.
Welcome. You're not alone in your newness to the meetings, that's for sure. Thank you all for being here. Sarah, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. So I'm on the phone audio and computer video. So if I can keep things straight, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
That works very well, yes, thank you. All right, first order of business, what did I do with my agenda here? I think is an approval of last month's minutes, is that correct?
I'll
Yes.
move.
Yeah.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Katie moves to approve. Eric seconds. Any discussion about the minutes? Corrections, any additions? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes from January 28th, say aye.
Aye.
Give me a thumbs up signal, that works as well. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you, folks. Staff report, Sarah?
Okay, thank you. Couple things to update the group. For first, we did have an executive meeting of the CJCC yesterday. And we had a pretty robust conversation about the purposes of the different work groups, the priorities of the different work groups, and really the utility of the different work groups. So we are going to kind of re-examine all the different work groups. We've got 9 different groups going on right now. All the groups are kind of working on their goals. We really want to align those goals, really leverage the other community meetings and partners that are going on. So we're just going to take a look at maybe consolidating some of the work groups or moving some of the work groups into just kind of standard processes that we continue to work on. So more to come on that once some decisions are made. So the executive meets again at the end of March. So hopefully we'll have some better ideas and some recommendations moving forward at that point. Looks like we got Judge Peterson joining us, so that's great. Next thing, the housing grant through the CBDG, we did submit the final application. So if things work out well, we should have some funding come April. That was a collaborative project with the City of Menominee, the Police Department. We had Chris Corporal with Human Services take the lead, and then CJCC as well. And we're going to have Stepping Stones and West Cap actually deliver those housing resources. So we're going to be increasing their capacity through some funding, but also through additional staff. So I think those will be some good changes. The CJCC participants of our collaborative programs get priority in the housing service. So that's really good news for our participants as well. And I would assume that would extend out to DOC as well, where we can get priority service in that rehousing. So it's emergency in a hotel housing, but then also a case manager to help look for suitable long-term housing for people to transfer into. On the assessment protocol piece, so that's with our part of the oversight of this group. Sandy and I have been meeting with some folks, mainly Sandy, but I'm certainly exploring different tools to automate our pretrial risk assessment. We were hoping that IT could help us devise a low cost to no cost form, but it's much more complicated than that. So We are looking at some similar counties in the processes that they use, but then also talking with a software vendor that provides some of our other case management software services, as far as really how can we automate that PSA so we can get that implemented. So Sandy, any updates that you want to give the group on that?
Not a whole lot, Sarah, aside from what you already said. Like Sarah said, we met with one of the contractors, Ottoman, and then I've been working with a lady in Marathon County who's in the same position as I am here, and just getting information from her as to what they use and a lot of the stats that they are keeping with the spreadsheets that they're using. So we're just kind of in the beginning stages and collecting information.
Great. And you were able to kind of work out a process with the jail as far as getting that criminal history information through Sergeant Ormson. So that process was set up. So we appreciate the sheriff kind of clearing the path for that. But we did identify an area of redundancy, and that would be with the DA's office doing criminal checks. So we are trying to set up a meeting with the DA's office, and that's one of the topics that we're wanting to cover. They're doing criminal background checks. We're doing criminal background checks. There could be some efficiencies if we kind of work together there. And then the last update that I have for the group is the state CJCC is up and running, and they're meeting right now. So it's a 2-hour meeting. We're focusing on standards for the diversions across the state. We did have a draft trying to finalize that. So I'll have more updates following today's meeting. And that is it for my staff report, unless there's questions. Oh, sorry, I spoke too soon. Just heads up that CJCC is going to be providing the county board annual report for 2019. So we're kind of working through that right now, but that's going to be on March 17th, live on YouTube.
Sarah, I think that's your 2020 report, right?
Yes, sorry, I'm going back in time further. Yeah. Time traveler.
You just want to keep you focused.
Sarah, to get back to the housing grant, what's the timeline? When do you expect to start receiving funding for that?
Well, the deadline was the 22nd, so we got our final report in. We are earmarked the money, so we're anticipating as soon as WestCap can do some hiring as far as getting a case manager hired for this project, the better. But we can, as soon as we have access to that funding, we can essentially start using it. And we're going to be a pass through to Stepping Stones and WestCap. So we're hoping by April. And Chief, that's your understanding as well, correct?
Correct. Yeah, hopefully we'll get approved for that and can move forward. I think it's going to be a great program.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Anything else?
Nope, unless there's questions.
Don't see any. Let's move on to item number 5, the data review, the 2020 Smashboard. Are you going to share a screen with us?
I am. I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to do some talking. I'm just going to give the highlights. This just came out of we've had our data meeting earlier this morning. So it's not quite finalized, but I do want to share some of the broad brush kind of trends that we saw in 2020. Part of this group's goal is to really look at our local data, what we're collecting, inform what we're collecting to really inform our decisions across the board. So We have our monthly dashboards, which are just kind of that month snapshot. But once a year, we take all the months, all 12 months, and we put them together, and we smash them together, what we call our smash board. So I just wanted to share some of the highlights, and this will be included in our annual report as well, in the final version. So feel free to ask questions, or if you see things that pique your interest, let me know. And once this is finalized, we'll also have, you'll get it in your hands so you can dig in a little bit deeper, but I just want to share some of the highlights. So I'm going to start with the first box here, which is the jail data for 2020. And our jail bookings are down 50% in 2020 from our typical years. So we know that because of COVID, there was real efforts made to do some cite and release, to give people their court date and when they need to show up, versus getting booked and released into jail. So we definitely had the jail bookings at a historic low, and that's due to COVID. As far as the average daily population, that actually went down to about 22% overall for the year in 2020. And the proportion of inmates that are leased beds through DOC actually is a greater proportion. So that is a fee for service that's coming back into the jail. So that's just a good indicator. The more space we have available locally, the more we can essentially lease those beds out. Looking at the numbers across with the jail, our Huber, that's the work release numbers, were drastically reduced in 2020. And that was also largely because of COVID. The folks going in and out every day, they're at a higher risk to spread COVID. So these are 10 on average per month. Electronic monitoring actually was lower, than expected. So that really was not utilized much in this past year, despite COVID. The demographics are really based on the jail bookings through the course of the year. So interesting to note just our trends. We are becoming less white and more Black as far as that jail composition. So when we're looking at the folks that are coming in and out of the jail, there is this disproportionate minority contact that we're having. And the trend is it's getting higher. We start, 5 years ago, we had 6%, we're up to 11%. So it is creeping up. The Asian percentage is been steady, and as the Native American as well. Our census should be coming out September, I heard, is the latest release. It's been delayed because our census information is over 10 years old. So we have a lot more diversity in our community than what we have, on our census snapshot. But we've certainly seen more diversity in the jail that doesn't seem to be as representative of our community based on our old census information. So definitely looking for that new census info. Also to note, I think is interesting, is we've seen a shift from the jail population being a sentence population to being a more pretrial hold. Probation numbers have relatively stayed steady, but we are definitely seeing more people on the pretrial hold versus the sentenced snapshot. That snapshot is 1 day per month, kind of that composition of the jail. So it isn't necessarily everybody that's in there, but when we're measuring month to month, we are seeing shifts in that population. That could also have been due to some furloughs and some different things as well, where the sentence population were released and then came back at a later date. Any questions on the jail population before I move on?
Sarah, I've got a question, probably better for the sheriff or the jailer, but when we have a lower jail population, such as we do now, how does that impact the budget? I'm guessing not a lot.
And, based on our previous conversations, I would agree with that. Ultimately, right, the sheriff would be able to answer that best. But there are certain just fixed costs that you need a certain staff ratio, you need food, you need lights on. So those are a lot of the fixed costs. So even if the jail population really kind of reduces, unless they're shutting down pods and, full areas where it's becoming shut down, I think the savings isn't as great as we might think. But this also helps us not to have to build a bigger jail, in that we're able to keep our jail populations relatively stable, where we know our neighboring counties, their jail population continues to grow, and they had to actually look for adding on to their jails. So that's just my perspective. I don't know if anybody else wanted to give their 2 cents in on that as well.
Well, the only thing I would mention, Sarah, on the jail population, with this last year that we've all been through, a lot of our data and stuff, it's probably going to end up being a little bit of an anomaly, but we're going to have to see, how everything settles once there's more normalcy that starts to come back into the system. But right now, this has just been such an abnormal year that we don't know really, how valid these particular numbers are, other than they were a look at one point in time, and what does that represent. But certainly decisions have been made throughout the last year that affected a lot on how we do business. And it was they were forced choices that were made. But I don't know if it really reflects, like I said, I don't know what all these numbers really mean for us, other than I have at least an opinion that they probably are going to be an anomaly and may not hold a whole lot, give us a whole lot of good information to rely on going forward.
Right. Yeah. These numbers definitely all have asterisks because of COVID. It'll be interesting as we move forward, really what shifts are continuing to, be in place. Perhaps we're going to have more court by video appearance that might continue as we move forward. We might see less jail bookings in general. But time will tell, right? So we really do have to take these numbers with a grain of salt, because COVID just impacted everything across the board. But you'll see as we kind of dive into the data, a lot of the trends are still still ringing true. So we're still getting some of the same trends overall, even though the numbers were much smaller in 2020.
Aaron, I see a hand up in your little section of my screen. Did you have a comment or a question?
I did that?
Well, I see it in Aaron's
Oh, okay.
frame.
I don't know, maybe we're able to hear me now.
Yes.
Still trying to figure this mute thing out. The 13 lease beds to DOC, I was just curious if that was opportunistic, or if that played into that the institutions weren't taking prison inmates in for much of the COVID spring and summer, and if those were leased to Dunn County out of necessity or versus opportunistic.
Sure, and the sheriff would best be able to answer that, but this really was put in place prior to COVID, that our sheriff's department has a contract with DOC to take some of the prisoners as they're kind of entering the system before they're assigned to their kind of institution. So it was kind of a holding pen, so to speak, where I think the contract was maybe up to 15 or 20 individuals that we would hold for a specific fee. I think the sheriff was looking to increase that, just because of COVID, but I think that's been relatively stable. Yeah, so I think the sheriff would also be able to answer that better.
Anyone else before Sarah moves on? The only comment I'd have is I hate to be in a position where the more people we have in jail, the better our budget looks.
Oh, right. Yes, because that is not the case, meaning we don't generate revenue from people being incarcerated. It is definitely a cost to the county and a cost to that individual and a cost to the taxpayer. So, but when we have an opportunity to not fill up our jail bed space and make room for others, and then that's just a little bit of operating revenue coming in to kind of help out overall.
Eric, I saw your hand go up as well. Did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I had a comment about it. I'm going to be curious as to what the long-term effect or into 2021 here, how having the limited persons that were brought to jail due to COVID, how that impacts with people showing up to court. Are they committing more bail jumpings than they have in the past, or are they adhering to their stipulations that they have prior to trial? And then how that relates to crime. Has crime gone up or down? And the other part too is that if it shows that they're still coming to court at least at the same rate, maybe it's by video or in person when possible, I think it presents an interesting scenario that we can lower crime or have a better quality of life without having as many people incarcerated, which is a good thing. And I think the other thing about having a lower jail population, it probably doesn't equate to like a lesser budget, so to speak, but perhaps it's better outcomes for the persons that do need to be incarcerated inside the jail at that time, whether it be the programming that's offered or appropriate supervision to make sure the inmates are safe and doing whatever it is they're supposed to do while they're in there. So I think that this, although COVID has been 2020 is an awful year in my opinion, it did provide some opportunity here to look at some things that I think down the road we were already looking at about trying to reduce jail population, not have as many people housed. It just was forced on us because of a pandemic. So I'm trying to look at the bright side of things and thinking this presents a very interesting opportunity for us to study what has taken place. And is this something that we can continue to operate with and be successful at?
Chief, just a comment on what you were saying there. A lot of what we have some, I guess, inferences that we'd like to draw from what's happening. And one thing with us, and Judge Peterson probably could help me out here, but one thing I feel that with COVID, our ability, even though the courts have been open, our ability to process cases as a whole and to have folks all being accountable, that has been struggled a little bit because we just haven't had the people, the kind of the appearances. There's been a lot more churning. That's why we probably sometimes see they start out with 2 cases or something, and all of a sudden 6 months later, we now got 4 cases or 5 cases. There's just so much churning coming on, and that's going to be a challenge going forward as this COVID subsides, and then we still got this backlog that we're trying to address, and that's affecting us all. And I got a feeling that there's certain issues, and we don't know yet probably, but I almost get a feeling with what I'm kind of seeing, I'm not so sure we're holding our own against some of our drug activity in the county. Because of the lack of contact, being able to process, because a lot of the folks that are using, we might have somebody on a drug charge, but if they're using a second, a third, or fourth time and they still haven't resolved their original cases, that's kind of been a real problem. But I don't know, Judge Peterson, if you want to just comment. But back to what you're saying, the other part of it, sure, are there some things that probably are going to jump out that we can modify going forward because of how it's worked? But that's been a real issue for us. So Judge Peterson, I don't know if you have a comment.
I think we lost the judge.
I think he's gone.
I think it's nap time. Okay.
Judge, I appreciate you sharing that with me because that is something I've been curious about as to whether or not people have been able to maintain their court dates. And then the other part, especially in dealing with addiction, so you're bringing up the drug use, whether it's alcohol or some other substance, they are challenging because of those addiction issues. So I didn't know if that was creating an opportunity for those folks to continue to offend or not abide by their bond restrictions, and then how it compares to, let's say, the other offenders that, whether it may be battery or disorderly conduct, that, let's say, substance use disorders are not necessarily attached to that.
Well, I think your point, yeah, your point is well taken. If we have cases that don't get resolved, obviously a derivative of that is bond violations. They're out on bond, case unresolved. They get a new charge. They not only get the new charge, but they're going to have bond violation charges as well. And you know, sometimes that might be. So we have seen an increase, you know, with bond violations for folks just because of the number of the cases they still have open. And that's a problem.
That is a problem. I appreciate you sharing that information. I did not know that.
Any other discussion surrounding this topic? Sarah, did you want to proceed then?
Yes. And I think what we were just, the discussion, I think it was going to be even more validated as we go through some of the data here. So proxy, that's the law enforcement quick screener that they're doing with offenders out there. Those numbers were down for 2020. So it like anything else, impacted by COVID. The numbers for DUZO actually were up from 2019. So, which is good, meaning we got more officers filling out the proxy and then having it processed and come in. The trends are generally the same, even though our numbers are lower, where we're seeing about half of those individuals come back as a low risk, other third come back as a medium risk. We're seeing the alcohol and other drug abuse to be the primary driver of the crime activity that we're seeing. So OWIs, possession of THC, methamphetamines. And we're also continuing to see the same trends of disorderly conduct, certainly domestic abuse and battery to be the other kind of main crimes that we're seeing. And anecdotally, we're hearing just about, you know, our population is stressed, right? And we start to see more of the substance use, more of the domestic situation. But we're looking at prior years, our numbers aren't any higher. They're just kind of that same main issues that we're seeing. Likewise, the demographics have been pretty consistent over year as well. So we don't see a whole lot of veterans in the program or contact. We're seeing more and more women or females, quite a bit of minority contact, quite a bit people on probation that were having contact. Stout numbers were down, probably because they weren't in person as much. And then that restitution numbers were down as well. All right, I'm gonna keep moving unless somebody interrupts. Okay. Pre-charge diversion. So this is that first-time offender, low-risk offender program. We do have, those numbers were up in 2020 over 2019 previous years. So we do have the DA's office offering more of those diversions. I'm going to be adding in the direct referrals from law enforcement because that is one of the I guess, things that we're wanting to track. Law enforcement has the ability to do direct referrals. We haven't seen a whole lot of those in the past, but it does allow us to kind of track to see if law enforcement are utilizing that program more directly from the get-go. Completion, yep, please.
Excuse me, can you explain a little bit the significant decrease following 2016? Or maybe the significantly higher number in 2016.
Sure, that's when the deferred prosecution coordinator position was created in the DA's office. So Brad is he holds that position now. So that's a part-time position that got started, I think, April in 2016. So that's when we started keeping the numbers. And that's when, as she got more up to speed, we kind of formalized that program more, but there were some general referrals in. So that's kind of a partial year. And then we've got full years 2007 through 2020. But
the significantly higher number in 2016, and if that were only a partial year, how do we account for that?
No, 2016, there were 145 agreements. Is that what you're seeing? And
Right.
then in 2017, there's 232 agreements. So,
okay, I'm looking at the first line.
Okay, yep, this is the
Okay.
This will be 2020. And just having that additional staff person in the DA's office, they're able to really kind of look through the cases that come in and make more referrals. Time is the essence with this program. The quicker they get in the program, the more benefits in that they're not on CCAP and have that permanent record.
Yeah. Thank you.
You bet. Moving to our TAD program, this is the Treatment Alternatives and Diversion Funded Program. The numbers here were down as well. So we typically saw half as many people start the program, half as many people were referred to the program. So kind of speaking to Judge Schmeltzer's comment about just the delay in the court and the continuance, we're certainly seeing that in the referrals and then the actual starting of these of the TOP program. That's based on an agreement that goes through court. So if the cases continue to get rescheduled or kicked down the road, they're not actually getting into the program formally. So the numbers there are on par with what we've seen in the last couple of years, but the numbers are lower. Moving ahead to the DAGPs, so these are the agreements out of the DA's office. So the number of agreements for 2020 was quite a bit lower than what we would see in a typical year. And again, I think this is an indicator just of the agreements are, just those cases are getting either rescheduled or moved down the line. And the agreements weren't formalized as they would in a normal year. We had the same amount end, which would be typical because these agreements go on for 12 to up to 36 months. Interestingly, of those that do not have successful outcomes, the majority are because of a condition violation, not due to new charges. And that's consistent as well. Moving along, court appearance, fail to appear rates. So this gets to our discussion earlier. So the number of court hearings held in 2020 was higher than previous years. And the number of failures to appear lower, but a higher percentage. So we are, kind of what we thought is we'd have more people appearing because they're on video, and that necessarily wasn't the case. So we do have, a lower number that are taking part in that text reminder system that is available through CCAP. We want to continue to promote that, but a lot of that promoting really happened in the jail. And when Sandy met with people, or if they're made aware that that system's up and running. So if people are giving citations and release in a court date, they might not, sign up for this text reminder system. So that might be why the numbers are going down a little bit there. But overall, it was a busy court calendar, a lot more hearings scheduled, and I think this is an indicator of just those things being delayed, and then us seeing the delays in the referrals and the people actually starting the programs. Katie, anything you want to add from your perspective?
Well, not really, but kind of maybe. I mean, I think we're trying with the failure to appears. We're still sending out the text message reminders, but we're also, in addition, in 2020, we started doing paper notice of hearings. So we really are amping up, how much communication we're having with these people. We're really trying to get them notice, but unfortunately, sometimes they just don't communicate well with us as to when they get a new phone number change. And if they don't ever change it with us, they might get more hearings scheduled, but we're sending a text to a non-valid number. Same with not updating their address. We'll send them the paperwork, but they never get it because they don't update their address with us or the post office. So we're just kind of dealing with, I think, a hard population at times as far as communication and getting them the information that they need to be successful in appearing for court.
Thank you. Yeah, agreed. All right, I'm moving ahead here. Pre-trial assessment for the bond appearance. So this is Sandy's assessment piece where she goes into jail and does the pre-trial risk assessment, the mental health screener, and the substance use screener. Due to COVID, the numbers were about half of what we would typically see. But again, the trends are pretty similar to past years. A good 27% of the people that are on that jail list are because of failures to appear. So these are folks that definitely are significant burden on the system as far as law enforcement getting them, bringing them into jail. They're being held for that appearance the next day. So we typically have had a good chunk of those folks as part of our kind of day-to-day business. For the assessment for the mental health screener that Sandy provides, we're seeing again that 60% plus of those individuals are indicating they have symptoms that would be consistent with a mental health diagnosis. So these are the ones that, they're really self-disclosing that they've got some mental health issues going on. And then also with the substance use, we're seeing similar trends where methamphetamine at the severe level is the primary problematic substance for those that are taking part in this assessment process, followed by alcohol. And then interestingly, the others, the marijuana, opioids, and others kind of were at a lesser degree than what we would typically see in past years, but those numbers are very small. And then consistent with past years, about 30% are saying they don't have any drug or alcohol problem at all.
Excuse me, when this screening is done, is it strictly self-reporting from an interview? Are there other factors that are considered, for instance, the arresting officer's statements, anything like that? Or is this an interview where you're asking people what they think is their problem?
The face-to-face interview that I do with the individuals, and it's just me asking them questions and them self-disclosing.
Okay.
So the information just strictly comes from my interview with that individual.
Interesting. And so of those you interviewed regarding drug and alcohol use, for example, 37% of them admitted that they were meth users.
Correct. With the substance abuse screener, there's one particular question that asks them to select the most problematic substance for them during the last 12 months.
Okay.
So a lot of individuals will have multiple substances are problematic for them, but they ultimately have to pick one that caused the most problems for them during the last 12 months. And as you can see with our stats, meth is always, heading up as being the most severe for our population.
Yeah,
and I need to be able to get a handle on how some of these tools are being used, because I'm still learning a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think this indicates too that regardless of why people are brought into jail, whatever kind of offense they're being charged with. You know, it could be a burglary, it could be a failure to appear. And when Sandy sits down and does the assessment, you know, they're disclosing this information, and that does get back to the courts, the DA's office, and the prosecution in a pretrial report as an indicator that this person has some treatment needs that are unmet, whether it's substance use or mental health.
One last question, and I think I know the answer, but you asked them about the most problematic, and so they're going to list one thing as being more important than potentially other factors. So if we added up all those numbers, that would be the total percentage of people who admit that they have a problem with one drug or another, right?
Right. So for 2020, out of the 193 people, 71 of them picked meth as their most problematic substance.
So all 193, though, had some kind of drug or alcohol issue.
Well, there were 60 of them that said no
No.
substances
Yeah,
caused a problem. And again, it's self-reporting. I would beg to differ, but that's their perception and their view of what they have going on in their life.
Right. Thank you. I should have noticed that.
All right. And we're almost at the end here. I didn't want to take the whole time here, but this is important information that that this group really needs to understand. So I appreciate the thoughtful questions and discussion here. Treatment court and family treatment court were both had lower referral rates, higher termination rates than what we would typically see. Family treatment court just starting off, so the numbers are low. We've already kicked some changes into place to get some more automatic referrals. The referral process has been real challenging with family treatment court. With the adult treatment court, the referrals are also down from what we would typically see in a year. The number of participants starting was also down, 50% from what we would see in a normal year. And then we had more terminations than we had graduations, which, some years are like that. But I think this is also indicative of just the level of struggle out there that this high risk, high needs population has, really struggling to adapt to kind of this virtual world that we're living in. And the results here, a lot of times the terminations were they weren't terminated due to continued use, but the termination was a result of their continued use that led to new criminal activity. So that continued use, really is something that has, that's why we focus on that treatment in order to reduce that. Otherwise, it can continue on and becomes worse. Moving right along, this is our jail to community reentry. So I do have one field that I need to update, but this is the folks that are in jail and have agreed to volunteer to get assessed and make a plan and start focusing on their transition back into the community. We've had only 39 individuals start the program last year, so it's about half of what we would normally do. But so far in the life of that program, we've helped 180 individuals leave jail to kind of move on with their lives. So I think that's a real strong number as far as that participation. Sandy assesses them, and then those plans are based on the assessments. The assessments are, again, consistent trends year after year. These are the criminogenic factors that correlate with crime activities. So if we want to reduce recidivism, we should be focused on these areas. So these are things that really everything except education is a need for this population. And this is where we can look to evidence-based programs to work on these in treatment and other things. We're also seeing that just the needs that people have, mental health care needs, substance use needs, they need medications upon release, they need critical documentation, driver's license, social security cards, housing. We were talking about the housing grant. 64% of those that, of that 180 need housing assistance. And the number's gone down, but it's been a lot. It's certainly a need. And then when we're looking at just the breakdown of gender, we're seeing that consistent with our other, measurements across the board. And for risk, we are seeing the high risk people wanting to participate in this program. So again, that's where we're going to see the biggest reduction in recidivism, is that high, medium risk. Quite a few low risk people in jail, but that could be due to the crime that they committed, not necessarily the risk that they're in jail for. And then that represents those individuals that represent 38 children. And this is a point to say, these aren't just individuals that are in jail. They largely represent family units and 38 kids. So that's the review. So now I'm just gonna just kind of stop talking and give space for any comments or discussion or additional questions.
If folks have questions, you need to speak up. I can only see 3 or 4 of you at a time here. So if you raise your hand, I might not notice. There we go. Now I can see everybody's smiling face. Don't see any questions. Thank you, Sarah. We get an update on the numbers monthly. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. So the data work group, we just finalized December of last year and these end of year 2020. So we've got January and February dashboards to come out, and we want to ensure that they're preliminary numbers are the best that we can offer at that particular time, but we do have an as of date that we stamp it. And we try to get that information out there so we can at least keep our eye on the trends. But certainly month to month, we're not always seeing as much movement, but when we look over the course of a year, we can certainly see different trends.
Thank you. We do have one item left on the agenda, and we've only got about 8 or 9 minutes, so we probably ought to get to the work group goals and objectives and activities. And again, Sarah, I'll let you take the lead on how we proceed through this.
Okay, hopefully you see our goal sheet up on the screen here. So this work group really, we have a different chair moving into 2020. We also have kind of a different opportunity to focus on some different things. Last month when we met, we had kind of open conversation about different areas, different priorities that this group can help focus on. And then we also have kind of the feedback of the chair. So this is kind of a living document. So this is really helpful for us in the conversation. But these are goals that we're hoping to really identify some clear objectives, some clear action areas that this work group can work on that would be really consistent with our whole kind of overall movement. So that's why, whatever discussions we have here, I'm going to take back to the executive, because we really want to, link it back with our priorities and how we're going to be using our limited resources overall. So this is really an opportunity for the group to talk, what do we want to accomplish in this work group? What do we see as the focus? And I certainly say that the focus is looking across the system for evidence-based opportunities, which is part of our mission, our purpose statement, and then really continuing to look at the data to help drive kind of needs that we have or areas to explore. And then other specifics can really be, dependent on what this group wants to work on. And then ultimately what the CJCC executive and the full council agrees that we should be working on. And again, it's trying to leverage all these different really good groups out there that are working on some of these things. For example, the housing, we've got housing out of Stepping Up, we've got housing out of public health. And then Jim, I know you've got the interest in taking on housing as well. So a lot of different potential areas to go, but we're really wanting to hone in on that focus and hone in on the purpose of this group and what it can provide. And these are living things, so they change. So again, I will stop talking.
I'm going to open it up to the group since you're the folks with the direct experience. So if someone has suggestions on one of the areas to focus on or a direction to go in, this would be an appropriate time to share that. But I could go on all day. Do I have to call people by name here?
Somebody said they could go on all day. Was that you, James, or was that Chief Atkinson? I thought it was Atkinson, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I was
You're stirring up
here
trouble,
for many
Judge.
years, Al.
Well, here's something, just an interesting question, and I wish Jim was probably part of this too. But when you look at the evidence-based decision making, this is something that we kind of wrap around the process of CJCC, and the emphasis as we go forward was when we started out in the early years, you're trying to figure out, how do we proceed forward in a, shall I say, a smart way, an informed way, and try to look at things that we're promoting that have demonstrated through use, that it's been vetted and that they work, and to see if we kind of hold true to that as we implement different efforts here in Dunn County. And that's kind of what we're doing. And that's why a lot of folks over the years have been part of this, and Chief Atkinson certainly has. Sarah's been instrumental as we've learned how to do this. Now, the only thing I'm going to suggest here, just looking at the mission statement for the evidence-based work group, is it seems to me that we either kind of look at different efforts we're making and probably somehow ferret out, what does evidence-based decision-making have to do with this effort? And how do we evaluate what we're doing based to make sure the efforts that we're making are kind of consistent? Now, I think, an evidence-based outcome is if you provide housing, is there a direct correlation that there's a greater degree of success by folks that have been involved in crime? If they have certain things that they get provided, do they have a better chance of success? And that's the sorts of things we want to look at. The only thing I'm going to mention, and then I'll drop it, but is this group, I think, has to look at our efforts that we're undertaking and what are the anticipated outcomes, and is that effort evidence-based? Now, Chief, you could probably jump in here because I think you even teach this stuff, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, help me out here. This is what you call calling a friend is, okay?
Well, I think the way I look at it is very similar to you, Judge, is that our goals here are to constantly be evaluating what we're doing to ensure that we're having the outcomes that we need, or the best possible outcomes, and we're not causing harm. So this group, I think one looks at the current things that we're doing, and then also explores potential options for us moving forward to improve it. It's like, to circle back to the smash board, some people may look at it as, well, it's just data. What's the point of it? I think the real point of all that is it shows those are outputs of what's happening, but is it the outcome that we want? And so, like, one of the things that Sarah had pointed out was that we're seeing more Black community members are being incarcerated right now, higher than our population. So it could beg the question, why is that happening? Is it the type of crimes? Is it socioeconomic related? What could it be? But that's where I'm getting at, is that we have a twofold part, is to be innovative and utilizing evidence-based practices that work for the demographics within our community and give us the best possible outcomes. And then analyzing what we're currently doing, which I think is fascinating about the information of what happened during this pandemic year that we had, to see what impact that has, because it ties into some of the things that we may be looking at doing. That's really our goal, is to try to improve quality of life. And we do that by using the right kinds of tools. So did I cover for you there, Judge? Or I just talk in circles?
Well, it just raises a bunch of questions, because what I'm saying is, and I think Sarah mentioned this earlier, when you look at work groups, evidence-based decision making has had an important role as we develop CJCC, and we're learned how to work together, and we continue to work at that. But the point I'm saying is, we have, like, for example, we look at housing. Who determines or should be developing a housing project, a work group, or, oh, you've got a grant now, supposedly we're getting. Does that grant kind of stand on its own? But here's the whole question, Eric, when I look at evidence-based decision, do we have some information that suggests that a housing program for those exiting jail has a positive effect on their recidivism? In other words, if they got a roof over their head, is there a correlation between that and, say, for example, getting them employed? You know, is there a couple things, that activities we could undertake that improves their chances of success? Now, they got to do the heavy lifting, I get it, but are these efforts something that is going to move the needle on whether they recidivate or not? And I think these are some of the questions that we ask ourselves, other than, it probably seems like it's probably a humane thing to do. If you have people without housing and no capacity to get housing, do they need a helping hand? And I get that. But the evidence-based part of it is, if we do these things, can we put them in a position to quit using meth? Can we put them in a position to quit burglarizing? Can we put them in a position that, you know, whatever, they quit getting their OWIs? You know, it's more than one single thing, but is housing an evidence-based thing? If you undertake it and provide it to them, does it reduce their potential for recidivating? That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think you're making a good point, and those are things on how we should make our decisions going forward, whether it's addressing the basic, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If people can't meet those, it is near impossible to be successful in other areas like substance use disorders, et cetera. But I think that, to touch on what you're saying, is, yeah, we have to make sure we're doing the right things. Are they going to have the desired outcomes? I think it is a humane thing to do, but as it becomes if you're talking about evidence-based and how it relates to public safety and the criminal justice system, is it appropriate for us to be utilizing those strategies to help improve criminal justice or outcomes for people who are impacted by the criminal justice system? So I think you're spot on there, Judge. I agree with you.
Okay. Well,
and you shouldn't retire either. I think you should stick around a while.
Well, you know, but you know, here's the thing. I'm hanging on the door. I'm trying to hang on and stay, but everybody keeps pushing me out. You know, my staff says time to go. But anyway,
I got a spot down here for you, Judge. You just need to go one floor lower and you'll be just fine.
But here's what we got. All I'm saying is, this group, back to what you say, James, Mr. Tripp, is that, you know, what role does this group, as the evidence-based decision-making work group, have in this discussion? You know, do we sometimes manage a specific effort, or do we just gauge whether some work group's effort, and do we evaluate whether it's, you know, they're going about it using evidence-based decision-making as part of that? And that's what I kind of look at this group, is more of a gauge on, when we look at the system as a whole. Do we do things that are evidence-based. Like you could have a work group come up with something and say, we're doing it. Well, they, for example, could make a report to this group and saying, this is how we're doing it. This is what it's based on. This is what's, and it's kind of like holding folks accountable to be thinking about what they're doing so that we're trying to use the best evidence-based practice we can in solving any challenge that we have. And I think that's what, I'm just thinking about. I'm trying to just promote or encourage some discussion how this group fits as you go forward. Because here's what happens. We get to a certain level of knowledge, whether it's evidence-based practices, etc. New folks come into the system, and even such as yourself, Jim. And then where are you at in this understanding? We have to continually, be, I guess, re-engaging ourselves so to make sure we adhere to, what we're trying to accomplish here in Dunn County. And it's an ongoing thing, and that's where we're at with CJCC right now. We've been at it for a while. We've had a number of excellent chairs that have led CJCC. We've had a lot of good effort, but the question gets to be, how do you continue having CJC be viable? And that's part of what this group can probably help figure out, I guess. And I guess I invite other comments. Sarah?
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of this group is also to reach consensus, and then for us to try to get our agencies working in those directions. And I think a good example is the harm reduction, the juvenile plan. We spent a good amount of time last year talking about that, researching programs. And then, we do have there's barriers, right, to the implementation. So we've got, one agency moving ahead and another agency not. So, and I think part of this group is to really get that buy-in, get the consensus, and then work to reduce those barriers to make it happen. And that can come through funding through county board. It can, it also gives me priority that, we want funding for this, go find a grant, but that we're actually working in concert and in unison instead of a little bit here, a little bit there, or we're going to go out to pasture and go look at this. It just helps us have more focus and direction for the whole system, and then to actually, to get that consensus and buy-in that this is important, and here's what we're working, together to do. And unfortunately, the sheriff's not here today because I think he's a big part of this conversation when we're in the DA's office. And even, human services. We spent time talking about youth and human services. It's been difficult to engage them in the meetings. So we need to have the people in the room when we're talking about these certain issues and their commitment to participate as well. Yeah,
and that's a good question, our point that you make, Sarah, and that's part of what we said in some of our discussions, either at CJCC executive committee, but a CJC as a whole, as a moving body, is something that kind of reacts to what the system needs as a whole, and you're kind of a nimble. We used the term yesterday, I think, being nimble to addressing different needs as we evolve, and being true to what our kind of mission is. And that's kind of having the ability to stay on task. Otherwise, an organization like CJCC and stuff, we end up doing, somebody comes in and has no, I guess, attachment to the significance of where we've been and how we got here. You can come up and go off on a tangent and develop something that may not quite fit the overall effort of a collaborative program like this. And that's something you always got to be aware of, and that's kind of your role, Sarah, in keeping us honest and keeping us, pulled together. But the other thing I'm just going to leave a thought with for you, Jim, you can't underestimate, though, the power of bringing folks in that don't always work like within the court per se, but it's like having, I remember when we had Steve Rasmussen as a chair, or we've had Eric as a chair, and how that's been so powerful as far as having our ability to move forward and reaching out. And there's always a lot of strength in numbers if we get on the same page going forward, and that's so huge. And that's why, and I think with Chris Corpola, it's going to be a kind of a new touch on it, and it's going to be interesting how that plays out. But at the same time you do that, then how do we keep all the ones that have been here totally engaged and we're on the same page? I'm digressing a little bit, maybe getting you outside the discussion, but at least I think going forward, I think that's something to, think about.
I really want to tell you how much I appreciate this previous conversation, because these are issues that I've obviously struggled with in my brief tenure here. But in some ways, it seems fairly simple to me. If you have faith in your assessment tools, I think that tells you the kinds of things that are needed. You can find programs and processes and tools to use to address those needs, and very often you don't have to do the verification yourself. It's already been done, or at least partially. But the bottom line is this going to meet our needs, and how do we demonstrate that? And if we can do that, and it's worthwhile, and it addresses a real need, then I think we go forward with it. And I think one of those things in particular, because this is my background, is the Botfin curriculum for youth. I've seen the DARE program over the last number of years. I really appreciate aspects of DARE, because I think it addresses one of those criminogenic needs that the assessment identifies, which is a lack of being able to socialization, a disconnect from society. And I think police officers in schools help to overcome that kind of thing. But the problem with the DARE curriculum is that it's been evaluated on any number of levels for any number of years, and it's been found lacking in its overall ability to actually change behaviors. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to do anything from, well, I shouldn't say anything, but a lot of these things, we've got evidence already as to its efficacy. And I think we've got plenty of expertise, both here in this meeting and in other parts of the county, that tell us what our needs are and where they are. So I'm really looking forward to the potential that we can identify some of those things, some of those tools and processes that we can apply to our needs, and we can apply those things with some kind of confidence that we're going to see changes in the numbers that are favorable and that are what we want to do. And I've gone on too long myself. We are a little bit over our meeting time here, and it's my understanding that you like to try to keep things pretty much to an hour, so that people have. I don't have any kind of a life, but I know a lot of the rest of you do. So I think, unless Sarah's got something to conclude with, one of the things we might do is take a look at our next meeting date, and then adjourn for today. We've got plenty to think about, I think. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to wrap up?
No, just that. Just take this feedback, and Jim and I will continue to discuss the goals, and we'll also be bringing this back to executive. So this is kind of moving and changing, but I appreciate everybody's feedback. As far as the next meeting date, we were looking to maybe shift to the first Thursday in the month, which would be April 1st, I believe, at noon.
So unless there are difficulties and massive negative responses, we will plan to meet again on April 1st at noon. How's that sound? Excellent. All right, then, if there's no other business for the good of the order, I want to say thanks to all of you who took your time and shared your expertise and your passion and commitment, and call the meeting adjourned.